We're almost there. Welcome to the very last hour of Econothon. We've been on the air for a solid 24 hours, but we have saved the best for last. I'm Raka Banerjee, and I'll be wrapping up this special broadcast from the World Bank Group. Thank you to everyone who's been in contact so far. You can continue to be part of the conversation. Use that hashtag Econothon. And if you've missed even a second of the 24 hours, you can watch back any of the sessions on World Bank Live. One final check around the world. It's now 11 a.m. here in Washington, D.C., 6 p.m. in Paris, 3 p.m. in Accra, and 11 p.m. in Kuala Lumpur. So we have lots more to come in this last hour. Here's the rundown. The International Development Association, known as IDA, is one of the largest sources of funding for fighting extreme poverty in the world's 75 poorest countries. IDA provides interest-free loans and grants to countries for projects that help boost economic growth, build resilience, and improve the lives for poor people around the world. Today, I'm joined by Poonam and Oscar. Welcome.
Thank you.
Nice to have you here.
Thank you, Raka. I'm excited to be here in the 24-hour Econothon.
It's very exciting for all of us. So can you explain for our audience a little bit about what IDA is?
Sure. IDA is the International Development Association, and it's part of the World Bank that provides development finance and support to the world's poorest countries. IDA was established in 1960, and since then it has invested large amounts of investment in both in terms of grants, loans, and guarantees to the poorest countries. As I said, since 1960, IDA has provided $388 billion for investments in 113 countries.
Wow.
And these resources have helped to provide critical development investments that bring stability, growth, and prosperity to the poorest countries in the world. IDA is also, we have beginning this year, we have 76 countries that are IDA countries, and we are working in these countries where we are also addressing poverty, elimination of poverty. 500 million, approximately 500 million people, the poorest people in the world, people living in extreme poverty, live in IDA countries. So IDA clearly has a very big role to play in helping countries to develop and address poverty.
Definitely. Thanks for sharing that. Can you, Oscar, can you share a little bit about what is the poverty situation that's facing the countries that are in IDA?
Thanks. Just building on this last point that Poonam was making, IDA is critical for our goal of eradicating extreme poverty. About 2/3 of all the extreme poor in the world are actually in IDA countries. Now, the good news is that we have seen very substantial declines in poverty, not only worldwide, but also in IDA countries. So if you focus just on IDA countries, since 2002 to the latest figures that we have, the poverty rate has come down from something like 49% to 31%. So this is good news. Now, at the same time, 31% is still a very high figure. And this is the 500 million people that Poonam was talking about. So while we have good news, it's certainly no time for complacency.
Definitely. How is IDA supporting these countries to kind of continue these trends?
As part of the World Bank Group, IDA brings both global knowledge and solutions along with financing to help address the unique challenges that IDA countries face. For example, one challenge that we see in many of our countries is jobs for young people. There are not enough jobs for young people. Over the next decade, about 600 million new jobs will be needed for entrance to the labor force.
600 million over the next
decade.
10 years,
yes,
wow.
Yes.
Okay, that's a lot of jobs.
Yes, that's a lot of jobs. And so there's no time for complacency, it's really important, to have a quality job, because that's the best way of escaping poverty and of making a livelihood. So IDA works with countries to implement policies that can transform these economies and help create the kinds of jobs, jobs that will help people and pull them out of poverty. And it's very important to have a vibrant private sector to support the creation of these jobs. 90% of jobs in IDA countries are in the private sector. So it's really important to have a vibrant and a growing private sector. This is why IDA created the private sector window to help bring private sector investments to the most challenging environments, in fragile countries. And working across the World Bank Group, through the private sector window, we have committed $578 million in IDA resources to support more than 1.3 billion in IFC investments and MEGA guarantees. And this has also leveraged an additional 1.6 billion of investment from other sources, including the private sector. So, but that's not all.
Can you say a little bit more about the window?
Yeah, well, that is, it's new, the private sector window.
Okay.
And the idea is to bring in private sector, investment into the country, both externally and domestically. And IDA, and this is in fragile countries where there are obviously very difficult conditions.
Right.
So it's helping to foster and promote private sector development. But IDA supports a broad spectrum of development, sectors, and this support makes real impact in people's lives. Since 2011, I'll give you some numbers, just being a little wonky. IDA has helped to provide 657 million people with essential health services. We have helped to construct or improve 140,000 kilometers of roads, and we helped train or recruit 8.5 million teachers. So these are just a few examples.
Wow.
Of course, there's much more that needs to be done.
So it's health, infrastructure, education.
Covers
That's
a very broad
fantastic.
spectrum, yes.
Oscar, do you feel like, you said we went from 49% to 31%. What do you see going forward to 2030? Do you see these poverty trends continuing to decline?
We see continuous decline, but the one thing that we need to sort of like understand is that there's been a geographical change in poverty. So poverty is shifting towards, in a way, sub-Saharan Africa and fragile contexts.
Right.
So, now over half of the extreme poor are in sub-Saharan Africa.
And in some of those countries, it's actually going up.
In some countries, maybe going up, especially those afflicted by fragility. At the same time, in a lot of these places, also we don't have like very good data sources. It's very difficult to connect.
Right.
But besides that, this sort of like a shift is relevant for a couple of reasons. Traditionally, other regions of the world, like East Asia, has been growing faster. Economic growth has been faster. It's slower in Africa. It has been. And the other thing is fragility is a particularly difficult context to actually make a difference in reducing poverty. So this means that the rates of decline of poverty that we got used to over the last couple of decades may just not be happening right now. And we've already seen a slowdown in the decline in poverty. So the bottom line is like this means that we actually, it's not enough that some regions of the world reach the goal of eradicating extreme poverty. All regions need to reach that.
Yeah.
And at current sort of like growth rates and sort of like trends, some regions like sub-Saharan Africa are still forecasted to be significantly above our goal.
Yeah, it sounds like it's multiple issues. Not only is the data most scarce and of the lowest quality in these countries that are affected by fragility, but also it's hardest to make improvements or sort of improve the situation for people in those countries.
Yeah, the last mile is always the hardest, so there's no surprise in that. But in a way, it's sort of like in this case, we need to, business as usual is not going to cut it.
Yeah. So are there plans for how to sort of work in these different, more difficult situations, knowing that the trends are not going to keep going
I mean, this is one of the areas of focus of the bank. Now we're shifting a lot more attention, both our analytical work, etc., to understand the context of fragility, issues of measurement that you were discussing. This is where innovation and all of those in the audience can actually make a big contribution too.
Yeah, absolutely. Poonam, do you have any thoughts on what you see ahead for IDA?
Sure. I think as you were saying, there's no time for complacency, and we really need to ramp up momentum to reach the 2030 goals, eradicate poverty and reach that development, the broad development agenda. And what we are doing in IDA 19 is working with partners to define the policy and financing focus for the next 3 years, which is going to be the IDA 19. We are currently in IDA 18, it's IDA 19, we have 3-year replenishment cycles. And the focus that we have in IDA 19, one is a continuation of the policy commitments that which are set under the 5 special themes that are currently already in IDA 18. And these are, many of you will be familiar with them. This is jobs and economic transformation, fragility, conflict and violence, climate change, gender and development, and governance and institutions.
Okay, that's great.
Right, but within the IDA 19 package, we also want to incorporate a focus on critical issues. Many of these are cross-cutting. And this is addressing debt vulnerabilities, which is high on the agenda of our partners, both countries that have rising debt vulnerabilities, and trying to find solutions to help countries support them in addressing these debt vulnerabilities, as well as capitalizing on opportunities from digital technology.
We're actually going to watch jump to a video right now to talk a little bit more about IDA. Yeah, but thank you so much, both of you, for being here. It was great to hear from you.
Thank you.
I worry for our world. I see people flee countries mired in violence, conflict, and chaos. I see families trek hundreds of kilometers, migrating in search of food or a home, because cyclones, floods, drought have devastated their lands. I see masses of young people search desperately for work. There are women and people with disabilities denied equal opportunities. But I have hope. People give me hope. Hope that we will band together in times of crises to swiftly meet the needs of those in distress.
So we always hear about AI these days, but does AI have any role to play in development? There have been rapid strides in machine learning, and it's changing how a lot of organizations are functioning. But how can we really harness these technologies to actually improve outcomes for the poor? So to talk about some of these things, I'm going to introduce my friends, Bilal and Sam. Hi.
Hi. Hey, how's it going?
Welcome.
Good.
So, Bilal, you are working on some really cool stuff about how AI and big data can help improve governance and justice systems. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, I think the bank's mission on increasing shared prosperity and reducing extreme poverty is kind of tied in with a need to incentivize private investment and, of course, to protect both the human rights and the economic rights of people, or particularly the extreme poor and vulnerable populations. Improving the justice system is a key input into that, both because firms look for a strong and efficient business environment and want quick resolution of their disputes, and particularly people with social disputes, economic disputes, want access to justice, and in particular, justice systems need to be working for the poor and for the private sector. So in that context, AI can play a really important role in ensuring that justice systems both are monitored and executed efficiently, and even unburdened perhaps by the use of advanced technology that is now enabled by what we have access to. And there's a concern, obviously, that will machines replace people? Will machines be able to provide adequate justice.
Yeah, I mean, if you're outsourcing these decisions to machines, there's a lot of kind of concern.
Of course.
What kind of decisions are they making?
Right, and I think at this point, certainly, we are only kind of thinking about, or most of the world, even in the developed world, is thinking about outsourcing only very narrow types of decisions that are already being decided on fairly objective factors. But I kind of feel like it's really important to remember that machines are designed by people, and people also aren't particularly perfect. And there's a lot of evidence, I think, from the US and various other kinds of contexts about how judges are subject to the same kinds of behavioral biases and potentially subject to much more sort of pernicious biases around subjective sort of opinions, subjective preferences. There's plenty of room for discrimination, plenty of room for biased decision making, plenty of room for the judiciary not to be independently operating of politics and playing its fundamental role as that.
I've heard how judges, when they're hungry or when they're tired at the end of the day, they actually give out much harsher sentences.
That's absolutely correct. And I'm glad you've seen this. This was a study in Israel where they found essentially that the proportion of yes rulings to bail decisions, to people who seek bail, dramatically falls before lunch and dramatically falls before a coffee break during the course of the day across thousands of Israeli judges. So this is
a real
really
nightmare
important.
if you're waiting for your sentence to be handed down.
Yeah, no kidding. And so in that context, I mean, I think this really gets at the key thing, is that understanding these behavioral biases requires better measurement. And so even before we get to this point of replacing anyone, we need to measure justice, the quality of justice, really well. And that's kind of much of what our work at the bank right now really does, is focusing on measuring the right indicators, making sure we don't think of justice systems only as needing to be efficient. I mean, a really efficient justice system is where you flip a coin and
Kill
say,
everybody.
you were right and you were wrong, but that's not just. Right, and so much of the work that we're trying to do, and it's really, I'm proud to say, I think we're operating really on that frontier in the context of the developing world, is to identify what are the kinds of things we need to measure in order to make justice systems work better, and then as a second step, how can we improve those things as well in order to go back to kind of fulfilling the bank's twin goals.
On some level, you're defining what is good justice, basically, right? What makes justice just?
Yeah.
On some level. So
it's really easy.
yeah, it sounds super simple. So how are you doing that with AI?
Great question. So one of the really nice things about now is that we have that a lot of judiciaries are moving to electronic case management systems, and are through kind of agreements around transparency and more accountability through like OGP type partnerships. Essentially, a lot of this data is being not just put online, but the public is given access to this through public data portals if they want to look at trends, if they want to look at their own particular cases. And so what we're really doing is writing fairly simple scraping algorithms, essentially to download that data. And then in particular, not just the data on how the case proceeds, kind of the administrative case level, sort of the hearing happened and then the decision was made, but also data from the actual judgments itself. And that's when you really need the processing power, because these judgments are all written in text, right? So you have to teach computers how to read that text, because we can't do it. I'll give you an example. In just our work in India, we have data on 89 million judicial decisions that the Indian government transparently put up on their public data portal, so it's available to access for everybody. But try reading 89 million judicial decisions, and it's
going to take some
we
time.
Can talk. And so this is precisely where sort of advanced advanced processing and natural language processing and AI can play a huge role in trying to tell us how were these decisions made, on what bases, to what extent is there judicial bias, to what extent are these ideologically driven or driven by politics. These are all really important questions, and then to what extent can we use this information to potentially improve how justice moves.
That's super interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. Sam, you have been doing some work to use AI to predict famine risk. Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. And actually, I'll just start by saying that I'm not the only one working on this. As you probably know, there's a lot of initiative at the bank on helping do better prediction of famine in general in the context of the implementation of the famine action mechanism that's really trying to not only prevent famine risk better, but also deliver early financing in cases where famine risk is high. And so our project, which is actually a collaboration with researchers at New York University, Lakshmi Subramaniam and Anand Banashankar, really is framed in this context. And what we've done is we've also done something using text where we're actually trying to improve prediction of famine episodes and episodes of food insecurity in general by analyzing the text of millions and millions of news articles published around the world and basically trying to extract relevant information from these news articles to improve prediction of famine episodes.
So why did you choose news articles?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, traditionally, famine early warning systems are relying on information that it becomes available at relatively low frequency. It could be every month, it could be every quarter. But today we have access to this trove of information through different big data sources. It can be news, social media, and so on. So it's really about finding ways to extract from these big data sources information that is going to be predictive but at a high frequency to really improve this forecast. And we chose news because contrary to other sources of data that are available at high frequency like social media, news is really well structured and less noisy. So that's really why we focused on that.
Yeah, it's not going to do a lot of good that you found out that I'm suffering a famine a month ago, right? So it's really important to have as timely data as we possibly can in terms of famine.
Timeliness is super important, and we have access to great news aggregators of news sources all around the world to do that. So that's really exciting work.
So can you say a little more about how you're actually doing this analysis and how is it informing the work that people can do to actually intervene?
Sure, absolutely. Well, so basically when you have access to hundreds of millions of news articles, really the key is to know how to extract the right piece of information to answer your problem. And so what we've done is we've developed a new algorithm based on deep learning that allows us to extract causal statements from the text. And so we can identify in the news words that are causally linked to famine. So think of words like conflict or words like drought, like locust infestation, and so on. So we've identified about 1,000 of these different words that we can then track over time when they occur when in news articles that are published all around the world. And we use this information of the mention of these words to then help predict future famine events. And what we found, this is still early work, so it's not at the stage of being used into production yet, but we found really amazing results. Like when we put it into traditional model of prediction of famine events, it improves the forecast by a factor of 2 to 3 compared to traditional models. So it's really impressive the effect that these things can have.
Wow, that's amazing. So how was it being done before? It was these monthly, quarterly inputs? What's the comparison of your new model to the traditional models? Yeah,
so it's really the timeliness of the data, and also the fact that there are things that are not necessarily easy to measure through traditional statistics. Like the development of a conflict situation might not necessarily be well captured by sort of the traditional indicators that we have. And so having all this, the richness and the diversity of the information of journalists being on the ground and sort of reporting all of this information is really the knowledge that is key to help in this context.
That's awesome. It's very cool. I have a question for either of you. What are you most worried about in terms of these, since they're relatively new technologies, what could go wrong and how are you sort of working against that?
Sure. So, I think, again, fortunately, we're not, certainly in the terms of what the bank is doing, is we're not in the space at this point of kind of replacing the judges. But I think there's certainly from our side, from the measurement side, the quality of justice it's a philosophical question. Is it supposed to be all in favor of marginalized groups? Is it supposed to be driven by efficiency, et cetera? And so one of the, I guess, worries is that we have to get these measures right. And you can only do it proximately because, again, even computers can't read these 89 million documents and tell you whether a judge was right or wrong. And fundamentally, the justice system, a judge is trained to be the ultimate arbiter in a room. And they're supposed to take into account the particular circumstances of the case, the overall objectives of both providing justice, but also deterring crime and being socially sort of in line with social norms or pushing them forward, et cetera. And so making sure these are correct is really one of the key challenges. I'll give you maybe a quick example if you want.
I think actually that's been great. But thank you so much for both of you for being here. Really appreciate it. Really interesting stuff. Very cool.
Thank you.
So we're entering the last half hour here on Econothon, and it's our last chance to catch up with you, the audience. So we're going to check in. Hey Zubi, how's it going?
It's going great, Raka. Thank you for asking. Lots is happening on social, but I just want to give us an update and a final roundup of our poll. Thank you very much, everybody online who's been taking the poll. We got over 2,500 votes. Thank you, our online audience. And the poll was asking what was the biggest development challenge countries face today. And here we have it. Jobs creations. It's top on the list at over 700 votes, followed by climate mitigation and adaptation at 658 votes. And then last but not least, we have health and education at over 584 votes. Thank you, everybody, for taking the poll on our Scribble Live. Continue watching and also engaging with hashtag Econothon. And we're giving a few shout outs to some folks who shared some comments like Nwanze Anthony. You said, I think for Africa to meet up with a 2030 agenda, we need to incorporate more impact investment principles in our industry activities. Thank you, Anthony. And then Gabrielle Apia said, sustainable development encompasses a wide range of our life, affecting social, cultural, economic life, and even the concept of human rights. I hope issues on empowerment, opportunity, growth, security, equality might be considered in the scheme of things during the Econothon to foster greater support for countries in the path of development. So there we have it. Thank you, and keep engaging using the hashtag Econothon.
Thanks so much, Zubi. That's awesome.
Sure.
So I think that this next session might be actually the most, one of the most popular ones that we've had. It's about behavioral economics. So it's a subfield of economics that is basically focusing on the psychological, social, cultural aspects of how we as humans make decisions. So today I'm joined by Abigail Dalton and Samantha DiMartino. So thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
How's it going?
Great. Excited to be here.
So can you tell me a little bit about what actually is behavioral economics?
Sure, and I think it's important to think about not just what is behavioral economics, but why do we use behavioral economics? So standard economic theory assumes that everyone is a perfectly rational individual who's motivated by traditional policy tools like laws, incentives, providing a standard amount of information. Behavioral economics, or behavioral science as it's called, because we incorporate a lot of different fields from social psychology, assumes that people are motivated by what other people around them are doing, how information is presented, what people in our culture think, what our history informs us of, and just sort of those standard biases and implicit beliefs that everyone's subject to.
Absolutely, yeah. So we're getting away from the sort of rational economic man view to actually what influences us, what makes us tick.
Exactly. And the Mind, Behavior, and Development Unit, which is a part of the bank within the Poverty and Equity Global Practice, we think a lot about how can we use behavioral science to inform bank operations. So how can we take some of the terrific work that our colleagues are doing and really embed a behavioral view to think about, what are the social aspects that we can incorporate? What's some of the policy or program design that we can use by doing some of this diagnostic work around human behavior, what people are doing, what people are thinking, how they interact with the programs and policies that we've created.
That's really interesting. I mean, I'm thinking of, there's some studies where if you give people an option of 15 different types of jam, versus 3, they'll actually walk away because they're overwhelmed. Right?
Yeah.
But we're actually looking at how can we use these sort of information to help improve the lives of people around the world.
Exactly. So choice overload, which is what you just described, is a good example of behavioral economics. So would we take 15 choices instead? Can we narrow it down to 2 or 3? It makes people's lives a little simpler. It makes making the decision simpler. And certainly in context in the developing world of scarcity, it's something that's important to consider as well.
Absolutely. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the projects that you're involved in and how we're actually incorporating this stuff into our work?
Yeah, so I would say that the beginning parts of where we've seen impact in behavioral science has really been on altering the details of timing, the messaging, thinking about how to simplify processes and procedures, and really highlighting social comparison. So this is really exactly what this choice architecture element that Abby was talking about. But really, I think the frontier that we're trying to move towards now is really trying to change mindsets and shift social norms more broadly, because we believe that only by shifting social norms can we expect long-lasting behavioral change. So in some of the work we're doing, and of course it runs the gambit from working in environment and health to education. So in education, we're working to shift students' mindsets towards learning and increase their aspirations. So as we know, cognitive ability has been seen to be, of course, a huge driver for socioeconomic success. However, non-cognitive abilities, which we call socio-emotional skills, are just as important and actually can be a route to enhancing cognitive skill input accumulation. So what we've been working on is trying to understand really the psychological barriers that the youth face in developing these socio-emotional skills, because they really, in developed settings, we're seeing them correlate with outcomes such as wages, schooling, crime, as well as performance on achievement tests. So what we're trying to do is hone in and understand first what are the skills that are in demand, and also what are the skills that the youth are lacking. So we're working a lot with...
In terms of like cognitive skills? Or
right, non-cognitive skills.
Non-cognitive
growth
skills.
mindset, grit, locus of control, self-efficacy. Right. So a lot of the projects we're working on in South Africa, Peru, Indonesia, Cyprus, we're building aspirations and growth mindset. So growth mindset really tries to shift the mindset of one's beliefs of their ability from something that's fixed and can't be changed to something that's malleable. So really doing the shift from fixed to growth mindset and embracing mistakes, embracing challenges has been shown to really improve student performance.
This is the kind of thing where it's basically, if you believe that, I'm born with a certain level of intelligence and that's just, what I'm stuck with, you're actually going to really limit yourself and not be able to perform as well, compared to growth mindset, meaning I can always grow, I can always learn more.
Exactly. And in the settings that we see, due to insufficient support systems, a lot of these youth haven't developed these skills and don't have the support system to actually even, go about trying to develop them. So we're seeing the really large impacts in schooling outcomes, and it also relates to the labor market. So we're doing a lot of exciting work in the labor market with socio-emotional skills. We're working in areas with high youth unemployment rates. So for example, in South Africa, where the youth unemployment rate is 50%, depending on the cohort that you're looking at, we are working with an initiative called Yes for Youth to try to really address these supply-side constraints using behavioral science and innovative solutions and disruptive technology.
Can you say more about supply-side constraints?
Yeah, so exactly. So thinking about how these socio-emotional skills are barriers in terms of how to activate the youth to engage in job search, the determination that they need when they face setbacks when job searching, and then of course success in the workplace once they're placed. So we're building a set of social-emotional and job readiness training programs that we're delivering via an app through really exciting content development such as edutainment and through a gamified experience. So to make it engaging and relatable to the youth. And so
what are you finding?
So first of all, we're finding great engagement, and we're working a lot on the measurement to make sure that, first of all, we're measuring what we think we're measuring. Socio-emotional skills are still a very nascent field in terms of making sure there's invariant measurement across different countries, as well as validity and reliability of these measures. But we're also trying to use this data to understand what the demand of the labor market is, as well as the skills that are in need of development for the youth. So we're using a lot of this data also to develop a AI and job searching, job algorithmic platform, which basically we're trying to use data-driven hiring for entry-level jobs, using a lot of these different types of inputs. So it's really exciting work.
That's fantastic, really interesting. I mean, you're going beyond these sort of little nudges to actually transforming how people view the world.
Right.
Yeah. What sort of projects are you working on?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Sam spoke to is a really great example of sort of the next level for behavioral science. So I think people associate nudges with sort of standard communications tweaks. Maybe I'll speak to a little bit more of those standard small communications
love those
tweaks. Yeah, which do have, I think, enormous impact. So if I'm selling behavioral science to someone as a new user, one of the things that we often talk about is tax compliance. So this was there was a pioneering intervention by the Behavioral Insights team in the UK, looking at can you use behavioral messaging in tax letters to actually increase levels of tax compliance. So thinking about social norms, determining what if you just do a small tweak in an existing communication device, so low cost, can you increase tax revenue collection within the country. So the bank has done a number of projects on this in Guatemala, Costa Rica, Poland, Latvia, and recently in Kosovo, where we've done this in the developing context. And what we found is actually not surprising to anyone who's worked at the bank. So context is king usually. The kinds of messages that we have found to be effective in Poland are different than the ones that would be effective in the UK. So
because the culture is different.
Exactly,
right? You
and
can't just expect one thing to work everywhere.
Exactly, and I think there's a lot of lessons that can be applied if you're looking to replicate elsewhere. But again, testing is always key, and it's also a nice way to sell this kind of work because again, low cost, tax revenue mobilization is important in a lot of these countries. The tax rate, the compliance rate is actually a lot lower, and so it's something that people are interested in. It's easier to sell, I think, to sort of higher level policymakers can say, okay, I understand why if you're saying, let's say, the majority of your country counterparts are paying their taxes on time, that increases tax rates, and there's systematic change over time as well. So one of the things that we try to emphasize at Embed is that capacity building for policymakers and really changing the mindsets around behavioral science is important as well. So can we change the way they think about policy and program design early on so that we're not necessarily relying on those tweaks later on? And ideally, at some point, Embed is not necessary to come in and change all these little letters or do small things like that, and we can focus on these sort of more systematic, intractable development challenges like Sam described.
I see. So in terms of the tax compliance, what did you find in these different countries?
Yeah, so in Poland, the team who did this work found that hard tone messages were actually more effective in increasing compliance rates. In that instance, it was more among older populations. So they found that younger populations responded to messages around how taxes pay for parks and schools. Social norms messages worked better in younger populations.
Okay.
In Guatemala, where we...
what were the hard tone
Hard tone is,
messages?
an example of a hard tone message would be something
You'll go to
like...
jail.
Exactly, yeah. Or in Guatemala, we tested both the social norm message and a letter that we described as sort of the active choice letter. So saying prior to this point, let's assume that you didn't understand that you needed to pay taxes or you simply forgot. From this point on, we're assuming you're making the active choice not to pay, and we'll sort of go after you accordingly.
I see. Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So how is do you see the field changing? I mean, in general, is it moving as a field from these tweaks to these larger, aspirational or, mindset changes, or does it just depend on the situation?
I think it depends a lot on the opportunities and the demand. We found that the key ingredient to success for a behavioral change project is really to have a local partner that's going to champion the buy-in and the rollout of the program, because ultimately, if you think about sustainability, impact, and feasibility, it needs to be in the hands of the country that's really rolling it out. So that seems to be the main ingredient to success for this. So if the appetite is, increasing tax compliance, because that's a huge, will result in a huge amount going into the revenue, but it's also about, I think it really depends on the appetite and, who's interested, who's engaged, and what they want to do.
And I'll also add, one thing that our team's really seen over the last few years is that it's less about selling this. I think most people at the bank and most people in development and policy really understand that human behavior is a core component of making anything that we're doing and anything we're trying to implement work. I'd say the shift is more away from, as I was saying, these sort of smaller communication tweaks and thinking this as a cute sort of easy fix, and more toward tackling some of these bigger issues around mindsets, policymaker biases and beliefs. So, policymakers, like all humans, are not
also subject to bias.
Exactly. So how do we start, and our team is starting to think about, how do you create interventions that can tackle policymaker biases, again, build capacity so that they understand the importance of thinking behaviorally about the experience of an end-line beneficiary, and even for our bank counterparts and our bank colleagues, thinking about, what are some of the changes that we can make in our program and policy design as well.
So what are some of the ways that you've been working with policymakers in terms of addressing these biases?
Sure. So it depends on the counterpart, as Sam was saying, and sort of the level of interest. But one thing we try to build into every project is an element of capacity building and learning by doing.
Okay.
So our goal as a team is not to sort of appear into a new project or appear into a government ministry, take over a project, and then tell them what they need to do. We're not just a consulting firm.
Right.
What we're aiming to do is really walk them through, okay, you have an end-line beneficiary. What's their experience with interacting with this program or policy? How do they get from their house to, let's say, a CCT registration center? How would they apply for a job? What does the form actually look like?
Yeah.
And I think changing that mindset at the individual level of the policymaker or the program administrator, and saying, here's how someone else is experiencing it. Here's how we could think a bit more about the behavioral bottlenecks that you might not have thought about earlier on in the program, and here's how you can continue thinking that way moving forward in your policy work, has really had dramatic changes, I think.
And that's fantastic. Thank you so much to both of you for being here. It was really interesting work. So we're actually going to come to our last conversation for this Econothon. In a moment, I'll be joined by the president of the World Bank Group, President Malpass, to reflect on the past 24 hours. But before that, let's just take a quick look at some of the highlights.
Welcome all of you to the Econothon and talk about the big questions in development economics.
On around the world, there's 24-hour, a full circle of hope, but also of difficult challenges that the countries are all facing.
Economists have become increasingly aware of the fact that the one-size-fits-all approach doesn't always work, that what may work very well for one country may not work that well in a different context.
We just have to help these companies over the next few months in fulfilling these commitments.
If we factor how the world would look like with a changing climate into the future, we can make investment decisions today that protect our children and our grandchildren then.
So welcome, President Malpass. You kicked the Econothon off 24 hours ago. What have you thought about it?
Hi, Raka. Well, I'm exhausted. I hope people had fun. There was a lot of enthusiasm from viewers, and I think it was because there was a lot of talk of transformative programs, of how there can be a better outcomes in countries. There was, it looked to me like it covered the waterfront. There was talk about resilience. Kristalina did a great a few minutes on that. Penny Goldberg did trade and the global value chains, which we have a big report coming out on, and so on down. Education, the ways that you can deal with poverty situations, debt sustainability, all of it was there, and people seem to be engaged in it from the viewer standpoint.
Yeah, I agree. There was just such a wealth of information. It was been really fascinating so far. Yeah, and I mean, we're wrapping it up now, but what would you say the role of data and knowledge is at the World Bank?
One that is valuable. The countries find it valuable, and it affects how the programs are actually put together. I was in a meeting yesterday, not part of the Econothon, but it was on the issue of rural. How do you have electricity in rural areas? Because there's a trade-off between cost and between how you can actually construct many grids, and whether that's how do you do it with from the standpoint of getting electricity to more people. So data is really important in that. How much does it cost? What's been the experience? And the bank can bring that to the issue, bring it to bear, because there's been so many programs in different countries.
Yeah, we've heard so much about the different types of data work that's being done, and I think a really big part of what the World Bank can provide to the world is also the knowledge that's being generated here.
That's right. Now it costs some, but a lot of the data countries are providing, and it helps them even to think about it. Can they find the data? Can they do surveys? And so I think there's some value in creating or in getting the data together, because it causes people to look into their own programs.
Absolutely, yes. What struck you most about, over the last 24 hours? What's the issue that's most dear to your heart?
Jobs is so important. That brings young people into the market, and there was a poll, I gather, that was done for the Econothon, and that was the issue that viewers were most interested in. That's of course a mainstream activity of the bank, and it works in all countries are interested in that. It's especially hard in fragile or violent countries because they have young people. The young people would stay if there was a way to make some living. Now, I do think that private sectors, even in the poorest states, can create jobs if they're given the opportunity. We'll be coming out with a report called Doing Business. It comes out, I think, in October, where you examine within countries what is blocking, or what are the capabilities to start a new business, and for example, how long does it take to get a business permit to start, and that allows some room for countries to address the business conditions and to create more jobs. That gets into, can you do it in agriculture? Can you do it in manufacturing? Can you do it by allowing people to be entrepreneurs? Women empowerment is a core theme of the bank, and that comes through both in the job side, but also in the governance side. How do you have a society that operates better? And I think there was a lot of discussion in the Econothon about women being more able to engage in their economies. The bank does, a report, Women, Business, and the Law, which is important in identifying the obstacles.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard so much about closing the gender data gaps, and also, bringing women into, basically, if they have more opportunities, that it's sort of a rising tide lifts all boats.
That's right, and that takes, and I've I've met with a lot of heads of state over the last 2 months, and they talk about that and want to think about which laws do they have to be changed in their country, which are the most important ones, and in some cases it's difficult for them to get it through their process in their country. Everyone's accepting, or seems to have fully accepted, the idea that this is critical to growth and development.
Absolutely.
Because you need women to be fully participating because they're part of the labor force, they're part of the educated, or if there can be enough education, then they fully engage. And so, but then actually doing it is what
That's
we
the
want
trick,
to push.
yeah, absolutely. So while I have you here, what would you say is your measure of success for your time here at the World Bank?
For my own time?
Yes.
Well, I've been clear. I would like to see transformations of countries, and that I can hope for that to be 30 countries that where poverty goes down a lot, where median income goes up, where women are fully empowered within the economy. But if it's 5, if it's big ones, that will make me feel good. I've enjoyed, tackling it so meeting the leaders, hearing what their plans are, finding the way the bank can interface with that, and then where can we really make a difference, have an impact. And that goes into all the, we've defined, or I like to define living standards broadly, so it's not just money, it's the conditions of life for people at the bottom. And so our total goal is to have that get better. And so I want to see that in the programs that we design, that it's going to move the needle, have an impact. India has some opportunity on that. They're making transitions that can be really valuable. Ethiopia is trying hard. Whether that can work, we want to work with them, and around the world. That's my goal.
So basically just, the more countries, the better, but 5 large countries or 30 of the poorest countries, if we really see them raise their standard of living across the board.
Exactly. Maybe break out of the debt trap. That's part of it. Have electricity that actually works, because to create jobs, nowadays you need 24/7. You need power that really works. Clean water, waste treatment, resilience in the face of climate and weather. All of those are super hard, and they need committed effort by the governments. And I don't want to leave out, education, health, the rules affecting how women can interact. Countries can do transformations in different ways, but the net result is this improvement in living standard.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for being here.
Okay, thank you.
So we'll be right back. We're almost done, so stay tuned. We'll be right back after this video.
Quiero contar historias con mis dibujos.
Saya pengen jadi produser film.
I want to do science.
Fashion businesswoman.
I want to be an engineer.
To make rehabilitation affordable to as many patients as possible.
Invest in me.
Eso ha sido el cambio en la comunidad y en mi hogar especialmente, ¿no? En ellos está el cambio. Son inteligentes, desde su sueño de ellos es ser líder.
Esos nutrientes de los alimentos que traía con mi abuelita, todos, mi familia, fueron un gran partícipe de mi vida. Pero ahora ya estoy pasando a una siguiente etapa, preuniversitaria, esa formación.
Mereka mempunyai mental atau jiwa wirausaha.
Kita juga diajarkan kewirausahaan.
motivate kids on how to think about logic.
Karena pendidikan sendiri adalah fundamental bagi anak bangsa untuk nanti mereka memajukan bangsanya.
There's this stereotype, you can't make it or something.
I borrowed some money and I bought a laptop and started programming the website.
No creo que sea un campo solo para varones.
In 6 months, I managed to publish it online.
Pero está en la decisión de uno mismo poder romper esas barreras y realmente involucrarse en tecnología.
Nobody has experience on how that solution needs to be built.
We're forcing them to be creative, to be curious, and to explore, and then we figure it out. It's such a reward. It's so exciting. It's almost like a eureka moment. We can just come up with something really huge.
Estoy saludable.
Belajar untuk mengembangkan kemampuan diri saya.
Puedo trabajar. Puedo hacerlo.
Untuk selangkah lebih dekat menggapai mimpi dan cita-cita saya.
Yo quisiera llegar hasta donde ni siquiera aún lo he pensado.
I get to do what I love every day.
Puedo hacer mi sueño.
I'm pretty happy.
Porque en realidad no tengo límites.
It makes my dream and my talent come true.
Invest in me.
Invierte en mí.
Invest in me.
Invest in me.
In me.
Invest in me.
So that really is it. We finally made it to the finish line, talking development nonstop for a whole 24 hours. We hope that you've learned a little bit about the important development issues facing the world today, and also a little bit about the work of the World Bank Group in ending poverty. But while it's the end of the Econothon, it's not the end of your chance to engage in these big topics. Remember, you can always follow us 24/7 on social media. Our handle for our accounts is @WorldBank. So I just want to check in with all of my co-hosts here. What did you guys think, Shri?
I thought it was a great 24 hours, and we hope you all had as much fun as we did.
So I learned two things. One, the World Bank can be funny. Anyone who didn't watch live with me, it's recorded, watch it, you will laugh out loud. The second thing I learned is that data really matters. And the thing the World Bank is best at really is figuring out the data, making sure the countries have the information they need to right-size solutions at the right time to make things happen, because data allows them to know that poverty is a face, it has a name, we know who the poor are, we're working for you, we're working for the poor, and that's what matters.
Nate, what did you think?
It was definitely a very good time. I think all the credit for the funny goes to DJ Dan to the NY Econ, who else could help explain economic fundamentals with Big Macs and energy drinks. Talking to our Rockstar about data and how important that is. But I think I learned too that it is possible to end poverty, but we have to make it a mission. We have to engage after the smartest people, but then we have to talk about it in a way that's accessible to people. And so, thanks for the chance to do that.
Absolutely.
And I learned that development is participatory. So I loved engaging with all our online audience. That was fun. And I think one of the highlights was debuting the Econothon t-shirt. So that was fun. But really seriousness, I really enjoyed all the talks that came out of our experts and economists and colleagues. I feel smarter.
Yeah, me too. So a big thank you from all of us to all of you. Goodbye.
Bye.